Welcome to the midweek update for this week, where we look at things happening at a state level that affect us living here in Greater Brisbane. This video is sponsored by Wise and Silent Travel Insurance, and this week we'll be looking at a crackdown on people taking advantage of the public housing system, progress preparing for construction of Olympics venues, who's on the new para-sport panel, a new public sex offender registry, changes in some of Greater Brisbane's school zones, and some new housing developments pushing forward in Moreton Bay. First up, with over 50,000 people on Queensland's social housing waitlist, figures have been released about people who have been caught living in public housing despite not meeting the eligibility criteria. Since July, over 2,000 reviews have been conducted, and of those, 76 households have been identified as exceeding the income cap of $80,000 a year, and 9 public housing tenants have been found to own a property. The review also found that 1 in 4 were overpaying. Their rents have been reduced, while those underpaying will have any increases capped at $15 per week per year. 13 households failed to provide income information, so their rent has been put up to the market rate. I have a thought or two about this topic, but I'll save that for the part toward the end of the video where I give my 2 cents. Next, a quick update on progress with Olympics venue construction. I say construction, but that's still some time away, as the state government is still in the process of finding who they'll be working with. That comes before designs can be finalised and the actual construction work begins. The latest information is that over 250 expressions of interest have been received from the design and construction sector to work with the GEIC on delivery of the 17 new and upgraded Olympic and Paralympic venues. Also, there's been 20 expressions of interest for delivery of the integrated master plan for Victoria Park, which includes the 63,000-seat stadium and the Athletes' Village and Showgrounds upgrade. There's also been 48 submissions for a delivery partner to work with the GEIC to provide important program management services, with the state government saying the successful applicant will be engaged by the end of this year. With last week marking 7 years to the start of the 2032 Paralympic Games, the state government has announced the 6 members that will make up the Para Reference Panel, an independent body that will advise on how to improve accessibility in sport for Queenslanders. The panel is made up of Michael Dobby Bridges, a celebrated Paralympian in wheelchair tennis and 3-time All-Australian wheelchair AFL athlete; Ella Sabilyak, a dual Paralympian in wheelchair basketball and wheelchair rugby; Dane Cross, an experienced access consultant, advocate and chief operating officer at Sporting Wheelies, a key organisation promoting sport, recreation and rehabilitation for people with disabilities; Emma Beckman, an academic at the University of Queensland holding a Masters in Adapted Physical Activity and a PhD in Strength Assessment for classification in parasport; Tarita Blake, a 2-time Paralympic track athlete, ambassador for the Raise the Bar Academy, which supports Indigenous students through athletics, and a member of Paralympics Australia's First Nations Advisory Group; and Jen Rees, an operations manager and community development coordinator based in Cairns with experience delivering programs to enhance community wellbeing and inclusion, including the establishment of wheelchair tennis in North Queensland. Their focus won't be limited to the Paralympic Games, they'll also be looking for ways to make Queenslanders with disabilities more active in the lead up to the Games and beyond. A quick shout out to the sponsor of this video, winner of Best Travel Insurance for Value in Finder's 2024 Travel Insurance Awards, and local business Wise and Silent Travel Insurance. They won the 2024 award because it costs less on average but covers you for more. They're also the official travel insurance provider for Australian passengers on Scoot Airlines. Backed by a global insurance provider and a 24/7 medical assistance team, the rave reviews on Trustpilot confirm that you can travel with total peace of mind if you choose Wise and Silent for your next overseas trip. Click this QR code or the link in the video description to get your exclusive 10% discount on your premium. Now to another quite significant update. This week, the state government announced the creation of a new public register of child sex offenders after the introduction to Parliament of what they call Daniel's Law. The law was named in honour of Daniel Morecambe, a Sunshine Coast teenager who was abducted and murdered in 2003. Before we get to what they are, we should first look at what the current register looks like. When a person is convicted of crimes of a sexual nature that are connected with children, they are placed on a Child Protection Offenders Register and are required to report regularly to police a range of things, including where they're living, travel details, and any contact with children. Depending on if it's a first or repeat offence they are convicted for, they can be placed on the register for either 10 years or for life. Until the new law is passed, this register is not able to be accessed by the public. Under the new laws, there'll be 3 tiers that make up the register. First, there'll be a publicly available website with photographs and personal details of reportable offenders who have failed to comply with their reporting obligations and whose whereabouts are unknown. Secondly, there'll be a locality search application providing photographs to identify certain reportable offenders living in the local area. And thirdly, parents, carers, and guardians will be able to apply to police to ascertain whether an adult having regular unsupervised contact with their child is a current reportable offender. There's still a lack of clarity around many of the details, but we'll definitely keep our eye out for updates as things become more defined. There's been a lot of research done into the positive and negative aspects of public offender registers, and I definitely have my thoughts on the topic, but I'll save that for the section at the end where I give my 2 cents. While we're talking about trying to keep children safe, I have an update for many parts of Greater Brisbane with regard to school zones. Sorry to one of the channel's viewers, Robert Wynn 6451. When I teased that there were changes coming to school zones, he said that he hoped the changes would be a reduction in the times they run for. Sorry, Robert, nothing so exciting. Actually, it's probably the most anticlimactic out of all of the updates. The state government has announced that they'll be installing flashing school zone signs in 100 high-risk school zones across the state. They say that installing these signs leads to a 45% drop in the number of people exceeding the speed limit by more than 10 kilometres an hour. In 2024, over 12,000 Queensland drivers were fined for speeding in 40 km/h school zones, and 63 school-aged children were injured in school zone collisions, with around 30 of them needing to be hospitalised. Here's the list of schools across Greater Brisbane that will get the new flashing signs. If you get any value from these updates, you can say thanks for the work I put into them by clicking this QR code or the link in the video description to buy me a coffee, or you can support the channel by becoming a member, which gets you access to extra content and other perks. Thanks to these members for their continued support. Moreton Bay is the latest LGA announced to be using funds from the state government's Residential Activation Fund to unlock new housing in the area. $45.8 million will be allocated to 4 infrastructure projects in Moreton Bay, said to facilitate the construction of 10,300 new homes. This includes roadworks and a new bridge to unlock 8,850 homes in the Warraba Priority Development Area. Now it's time for me to give my 2 cents on some of the issues we've looked at in this video, from my perspective as a regular guy living in Brisbane, but also as someone with a YouTube channel dedicated to communicating what's going on and dealing with the nature of media releases and political spin. Let me be clear that this section is my opinions and thoughts only, and I don't claim to be an authority on any of these issues or even correct in my thoughts. My only intention is to stimulate thought and discussion, as some may agree with me, some may not, but it's the conversation that arises that's important. Hopefully we'll all learn something. The 2 things I'd like to address are the issue of social housing and the proposal of a public child sex offender register. I guess the first thing is trying to separate the facts from the spin in the information I have access to on topics like this. Looking at the state parliamentary releases, they usually spend at least a quarter of their announcement pointing out how the previous state government failed, and the rest talking up what they're doing and why it's so great. I'm sure it's the same regardless of which party is putting them out. I'm not saying that this is unique to the LNP, who are the current state majority. I think it's just politicians being politicians. So when they talk of the failings of the previous government when it comes to ensuring people allocated public housing are and remain eligible, I always approach that kind of information with a high level of skepticism. However, it is apparent from the number of people who have been found to be either earning too much or paying too much. It does seem that keeping track of tenants is not something that's been done particularly well. But one interesting thing is that while many releases have come out about how much the public housing waitlist grew under Labor, by March this year it had continued to grow. In December of 2024 there were just under 50,000 waiting, and in March it had risen to over 52,000. Now, you could say that it takes time to implement changes, and building new homes definitely takes time. But it's a bit of a complex thing when on one hand we're hearing announcements about all the new priority development areas being planned and how many homes they'll be adding to supply, and a number of social and affordable housing projects underway or being completed. But on the other hand, we hear of social and affordable housing requirements and quotas being removed from priority development areas that already had them stipulated. All I can say is that I'll be keeping an eye on the figures for how many are on the social housing waitlist over the next year or so to see just how much of a priority supporting people on lower incomes actually is to those in power. Now let's get to the introduction of a public child sex offender register to Parliament this week. Let me frame this by saying that I'm coming from this as a person who was a victim themselves as a child. So I'm fully aware the level of psychological impact child sexual assault can have, not just during childhood, but well into the victim's adulthood. Keep that in mind as I share my thoughts. I'm concerned by the way that when dealing with topics like this, things become quite emotional, which is understandable, but I believe the way it affects how we approach solutions is affected in a negative way. Yes, an adult taking advantage of a child in any way is despicable, and yes, people should pay for their crimes. But I think we should be focused on what will reduce the occurrence of these crimes. What does real-life evidence say about how we can prevent this type of crime? I have mixed feelings about the proposed public register. Looking from the findings of research from the United States, where public registers have been in place for long enough for a decent amount of analysis to be done, the studies are almost unanimous in showing that this does not have any impact on recidivism or reoffending. However, it does seem to act as a deterrent from people committing a first offence. But the concern of many is that a public register can lead to vigilantism, people taking the law into their own hands and intimidating or even attacking people who have been convicted of offences and are on the register. A fear supported by research on what has happened in the States. This is what I think may have the opposite effect to what is intended, as it may increase the chance of people offending. Taking an entirely punitive approach rather than a rehabilitative one has been shown to achieve nothing. The Queensland Council for Civil Liberties oppose a public register, saying that access to housing, employment and social relationships are fundamental to reducing the risk of reoffending. If we want offenders to not reoffend, forcing them into hiding is not going to help. The QCCL also point out that offenders' identities are often not disclosed not to protect the offender, but to protect the victim, as the majority of offenders are known to or related to their victims. That was true in my case. It was a family member. Another issue many have pointed out is that having the register can lull people into a false sense of security, and they may be less vigilant to look for warning signs among the people they know. The thing to remember with this register is that this is for people who have already been caught and passed through the justice system. Despite what many think, rates of reoffending are actually relatively low for this kind of crime, so the people we should be most wary of are the ones that have not been caught and therefore are not on any lists. This is what we see with the blue card system, which is an important tool, but it only works to screen people who have been caught doing something dodgy already. But we also need to look at the details of this proposal. It's not to make everyone that is on the register known. It's only those on the register who are not complying with their reporting obligations or whose whereabouts are unknown, and high-risk offenders. And while their images will be available, information will not include their name or specific address. Personally, I think that anything that can help police track down people who are not complying with their reporting obligations is important. So if it helps with that, maybe it's not all bad. But I still think that having images of people carries its own risks. When you combine the possibility that some people may look similar with the possibility of vigilantism, well, that's not a great combination. But the thing most concerning to me is the dehumanization of perpetrators. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not sympathizing with offenders, and if someone assaults a child, there is clearly something highly dysfunctional psychologically. But as a society, we're very quick to write off anyone who is broken as being beyond repair. This isn't helped by the language used. Today I saw the Premier talking about these monsters. And as someone who's been a victim, I can understand the anger and hatred, but I would rather hear that others had been protected because that perpetrator received professional help and was able to resolve whatever it was that caused him to act in such a disgusting way, than that he was told that was just who he was. Do I hate that guy? Yes. Do I feel that with good therapy he may have been able to change, making other children safe? Also yes. And just think, if in our discussions we talked about the possibility of change, maybe more of these people would get help themselves and get that sorted out before they actually end up offending. I think that one thing society would be better for, not just in this area, but for all people, is to be angry at what people have done, yes, but give them the chance to change. Is there evidence that rehabilitation can occur in many cases? Yes. But if we write them off from the beginning, that change is a lot less likely to happen. And none of us want to see children being abused. I think that's one thing we can all agree on. See ya.